Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we are turning our attention to the red planet. Or maybe it's more accurate to say we're looking at the invisible web of systems that lets a human being even exist there. We are diving into Andy Weir's debut novel, The Martian.
And I know exactly what you're probably thinking right now. Wait, isn't this that blockbuster movie where Matt Damon grows potatoes in his own poop? And yeah, technically that does happen. It's a fantastic visual.
It is.
But we aren't here to do a movie review. If you look closer at the source material, this book isn't really about a guy stranded on a planet. It's about a core systemic question.
Right. It's asking, how does survival even become possible when one person's ingenuity is, embedded within these huge, robust scientific, institutional, and cooperative systems?
That's the central inquiry, yeah. We have this pervasive myth in our culture, especially in the West, of the lone genius.
The Robinson Crusoe figure.
Exactly, the guy who survives on pure grit and raw intelligence, and maybe he has a volleyball to talk to. But The Martian presents a reality that's, well, it's the complete opposite of that.
It really is. Mark Watney, the protagonist, he only survives because he's acting as the tip of this massive systemic spear.
Right, he's the guy on the ground. But the spear shaft is made of biology and engineering, international bureaucracy, and just decades of institutional knowledge.
He is the end user of a massive supply chain of intellect.
Yeah, and that's why this matters right now. In our world, we so often see technological success through the lens of individual heroism. We look at a tech CEO or an inventor and we say, they did it.
We put their face on the magazine cover.
Exactly. But this deep dive, it's designed to make those invisible systems visible. The knowledge transfer protocols, the coordination mechanisms, the resilience leaps that actually make the impossible possible.
So our mission for today is pretty clear. We're doing an analysis of systems of knowledge, of coordination, and resilience. We're looking at the mechanics of survival, not just the drama. We want to see how the sausage is made, or in this case, how the potato is grown.
And to understand the system, I think we first need to understand the architect. So let's look at the author, Andy Weir.
His background is really the key to unlocking the whole tone of the book. He wasn't a novelist by trade. He was a software engineer and a self-described space nerd.
A huge space nerd. He started writing The Martian as a serial on his personal website, chapter by chapter, for free.
And he didn't write it as a character study. He wasn't trying to write the next great American novel about the human condition.
No, not at all. He wrote it as a technical puzzle.
He's famously quoted as saying the book was a continuous series of word problems.
And that just shines through in the text, doesn't it? Weir has a background in orbital dynamics. He writes his own software to calculate trajectories, like for fun.
Just for fun, yeah.
So when he wrote the book, he didn't just guess where Mars and Earth were in relation to each other on specific dates. He ran the math. He knew the launch windows down to the minute, which leads to what we call the anti-hand-waving approach. In a lot of sci-fi, if the author needs gravity, they just say artificial gravity generator and boom, problem solved.
Or a magic food replicator.
Right. But we're specifically intended to avoid all that fantasy sci-fi. Every single survival mechanism Watney uses is based on verifiable chemistry, botany, and physics.
And that fundamentally changes the narrative structure. It stops being a hero's journey in that mythological sense. There are no dragons to slay, no magical swords.
It becomes a log.
It becomes a log of system checks, failures, and iterations. It's an engineer's logbook disguised as a thriller.
So let's just set the scene for you. We're in the near future. The Eris-3 mission is on Mars, and the catalyst for everything is a system failure, specifically a failure in weather prediction.
A failure to predict the density of a sandstorm. A massive storm hits the Acidalia Planitial landing site, and the winds exceed the safety tolerances of the MAV, the Mars Ascent Vehicle.
And this leads to a cascade of events.
A total cascade. The mission is aborted. During the evacuation, a communications antenna snaps off in the wind. It strikes astronaut Mark Watney, and it pierces his suit.
And this is a really critical detail. His biomonitor computer is destroyed by the impact.
So the rest of the crew, all they see is his suit pressure drop to zero, and his biosigns go flat on their heads-up displays. They assume he's dead.
They have to leave to save themselves.
They have no choice.
Yeah.
And this sets up our central thesis. Mark Watney wakes up. He is alone on an entire planet. He has no radio. He has limited food. But the argument the book makes is that human survival in extreme environments depends on these layered systems.
The scientific method, institutional redundancy, shared problem solving.
Exactly. It's not about grit or hope. It's about the system.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've got 5 core insights to get through. So insight number 1, the scientific method as a survival system.
This is the bedrock of the book, really. Survival isn't about bravery. It's about math and chemistry. The first thing Watney does after he patches himself up isn't to panic or pray.
No, he calculates.
He calculates. He treats his own life like a variable in an equation.
He immediately does the caloric math. And this is such a great example of defining your system constraints. He figures out he needs, what, 1,500 calories a day to survive?
And that's if he's starving himself a little, running his metabolism lean.
Right, so he counts the food packs. He's got roughly 400 days of food left over from the evacuation. But the next mission, AIRS 4, it isn't arriving for 1,425 days.
So there's a resource gap, a massive one. You have 400 days of supply against 1,425 days of demand. The system is completely unbalanced.
And in a biological system, an unbalanced equation leads to death.
So Watney enters this loop, problem starvation. Hypothesis farming on Mars.
Mars has no soil. It has regolith, which is just dead, dry iron oxide dust. It has no biosphere. It's totally sterile.
Correct. So he has to engineer a biosphere from scratch. He needs bacteria. He has some Earth soil, but only a tiny amount they brought for experiments. So he uses the only source of complex proteins and bacteria available to him.
Human waste.
Human waste.
Innate soil. This is where the biological reality it sets in. And honestly, it's one of the parts of the book that sticks with people the most because it's so visceral.
It's so visceral, but look at the system he builds. He mixes his own waste and the desiccated waste of his crewmates, which had been vacuum packed.
Which is a horrifying detail.
A horrifying but necessary detail. He mixes it with the Martian regolith and that small amount of Earth soil. He creates an exponential growth system for bacteria. He incubates the soil, doubles it again.
And then he plants the potatoes they had on board for like a Thanksgiving meal.
He turns a waste product into a life-sustaining input. It's a closed-loop system he builds from nothing.
It's the cycle. Problem, hypothesis, test, outcome, potatoes. But then he hits another constraint.
Water.
Water. Plants need water. Mars is a desert. The HAB, it recycles water, but it doesn't create new water. He needs tons of it to soak that dry soil.
And this is where the chemistry comes in, and this is probably the most dangerous part of the early book. He has plenty of hydrazine fuel left in the Mars descent vehicle, the MDV.
Right, and hydrazine is nitrogen, and hydrogen N2H4.
Exactly. And he realizes if he can dissociate the hydrazine, he can liberate the hydrogen. Then, if he burns that hydrogen with oxygen from the life support system,
he creates water, H2O.
He creates water, but the risk here is just huge.
Oh, it's immense. Hydrogen is explosive. I mean, we all remember the Hindenburg. He's essentially turning his living room, the HAB, into a potential bomb.
A massive bomb. But notice how he manages it. He doesn't just, light a match. He calculates the stoichiometry. He realizes he has to burn it slowly, over days, managing the heat and the accumulation of hydrogen.
He actually uses this specific iridium catalyst to control the reaction.
Yes, and he burns it at a nozzle to control the flame. It's a terrifying application of the scientific method, but it works. He manufactures the water he needs to close the loop on his farming system.
It works, but it also creates this insane humidity in the HAB that almost kills the electronics, but he manages it. So he's created a calorie factory.
Calorie factory.
But systems fail. And that brings us to insight number 2. Redundancy and error correction over perfection.
This is such a crucial distinction in engineering.
Yeah.
A perfect system is one that never breaks, which is impossible.
Right. Entropy exists.
Entropy exists. A functional system is one that is designed to survive when it inevitably does break.
Let's talk about the IRIS supply probe. This is a perfect example of what happens when you decide to bypass safety systems.
It's the perfect cautionary tale. So NASA realizes Watney is alive, and we'll get to how later, and they know he's going to starve before AIRS 4 can get there. So they rush a supply probe called IRIS.
And they are under immense time pressure. The launch window is closing. To meet that window, they decide to skip the inspection.
They bypass the redundancy checks on the payload. They just assume that because they built it right, it'll fly right.
They trade reliability for speed.
Exactly. And what happens?
It goes up.
It liquefies. The protein cubes inside the probe weren't packed tight enough. During the high-G launch, they vibrated what engineers call sloughing forces.
And that shifting mass inside the rocket,
Yeah.
It just threw off the balance completely.
The gyroscope couldn't compensate. The whole thing spins out of control and explodes over the ocean.
It's such a visible failure. They removed the error correction to buy time, and it cost them the entire mission. It's the ultimate lesson in slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
And it illustrates that safety checks aren't just bureaucracy. They are integral parts of the engineering system. When you remove them, you aren't streamlining the system.
You're dismantling it.
You're dismantling it.
So let's contrast that with the Rich Purnell maneuver. This comes later. The Iris probe has failed. Watney is doomed. But an astrodynamicist named Rich Purnell finds a different solution.
A completely different approach. Instead of sending a new probe, he calculates that the Hermes, the ship the crew is currently on, heading home to Earth, can actually use Earth's gravity to slingshot back to Mars.
And Purnell is such a great character for this. He's the guy sleeping in his office, drinking cold coffee, just obsessed with the math.
He's the embodiment of the JPL engineer. And he realizes the orbital dynamics allow for a return trip, but it requires the crew to spend another 500-plus days in space.
And that's a massive shift in system logic. The first plan relied on hardware, a rocket, a single point of failure.
Yeah.
But the second plan, it relies on the human element, the crew. It replaces that single point of failure, the probe landing, with a calculated risk involving autonomous agents.
Precisely. It's a more complex system in some ways, but it's more resilient because the crew can adapt. A probe cannot. If a probe's parachute fails, it crashes.
But if the crew encounters a problem,
They can troubleshoot. They can fix the ship. They can override protocols. By re-injecting the human element into the plan, the system becomes anti-fragile. It can respond to shocks.
Speaking of the crew and NASA, let's move to insight number 3. Institutions as coordination hubs. The book makes it so clear that NASA isn't one big brain.
Oh, not at all. It's a mess of competing interests. It's a friction-heavy system.
Yeah.
You have Teddy Sanders, the administrator. His incentive is institutional integrity and public perception. He is incredibly risk-averse.
He has to be.
He has to be. He wants to play it safe because if astronauts die on his watch, the whole program dies. He has to answer to Congress. He's a villain. He's a system manager trying to prevent the collapse of his organization.
Then you have Mitch Henderson, the flight director. He's the guy with the headset in mission control.
And his incentive is the mission. That's it. He's willing to risk mutiny. He's willing to risk his career to get the crew back. He represents the operational imperative.
And the tension between Teddy and Mitch, it drives so much the plot on Earth.
It really does. Teddy wants to conceal the Rich Purnell maneuver from the crew because it extends their mission by hundreds of days and it risks their lives. He chooses what he sees as the safe option, sending another supply probe.
The Chinese probe, the Taiyang Shen, he wants to keep the variables controlled.
But Mitch overrides the institutional system. He leaks the maneuver to the crew. He sends the math to them, hidden in a personal email.
Which leads to the Project Elrond meeting a secret council where they discuss the fate of the mission, and it's named after Lord of the Rings.
Of course it is. And the bureaucracy eventually defaults to the safest option for the institution. But the human system, the crew, decides to override that.
They mutiny.
They commit mutiny. They force NASA's hand by changing course before they can be told no.
Which is fascinating because usually we think of mutiny as a breakdown of the system. But here, it was the system correcting itself to achieve the optimal outcome.
That's a brilliant way to put it. The institution paralyzed itself with risk aversion, so the operational node, the crew, took over decision-making authority.
They had the local knowledge and the ultimate stake in the outcome, so they seized control.
Exactly.
Okay, let's pivot back to the man on the ground. Insight number 4, humor as a psychological stabilizer.
Yeah, this is so often overlooked as just entertainment value for the reader. We laugh at Watney's jokes and we think it's just for us.
But it's not.
It's not. From a systems perspective, psychological resilience is a maintenance tool. The brain is the most critical piece of equipment on Mars, and it needs maintenance.
And Watney's logs are just hilarious. He relentlessly mocks Commander Lewis's disco music collection.
Constantly.
He rants about watching Three's Company reruns. He calls himself the King of Mars because under maritime law, he's colonized it. He even jokes about having Aquaman powers.
He is regulating his own cortisol levels. Isolation and despair, our system crashes for the human brain. If he falls into despair, he stops solving problems.
And if he stops solving problems, the physical systems kill him.
So humor is the regulatory mechanism that prevents that crash. It frames this terrifying reality as something manageable even.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
It's like a heat sink for his brain.
That's a great analogy. It dissipates the emotional heat so the processing core can keep working. If he took the situation seriously every second of every day, if he focused on the sheer statistical improbability of his survival, he would burn out. The humor keeps the engine running.
Okay, insight number 5. Communication as a critical resource.
Information is just as vital as oxygen in this book. Without communication, Watney is a lone processor. He can only solve problems with the data he has in his own head. And while he's smart,
He's not omniscient.
he is not omniscient.
This is the Pathfinder sequence, which is my absolute favorite part of the engineering in the book.
It's brilliant.
Watney realizes he needs to talk to NASA. He remembers that the Pathfinder probe from the 90s landed in Ares Vallis, which is driving distance away.
If you consider a multi-week suicidal road trip driving distance.
Fair point.
Yeah.
So he drives out, he digs it up, and he brings it back to the hab.
And this is where we see the evolution of a communication protocol. Initially, he hooks it up, but the probe is ancient. It acts like an old modem. It can only transmit images and receive very basic commands.
He can't talk.
Right. So he sets up signs around the lander, yes and no. NASA points the camera at yes.
Stage 1, binary. It works, but you can't really explain how to fix a rover with yes and no.
Then he realizes that's way too slow to convey complex ideas. So he sets up a circle of hexadecimal numbers 0 through 9 and A through F. He uses the ASCII table.
Where every letter of the alphabet is represented by a pair of hex digits. So A is 41, B is 42, and so on.
It's a hack. I mean, he's using a camera designed to take high-res panoramas to point at signs he made in the dirt to spell out text messages. It's so painful.
It takes hours just to say, how do I fix the radio?
And on Earth, they're manually typing out the hex code. But then NASA sends a patch. This is the software update phase. They hack the rover's software to allow it to interface with Pathfinder.
So they can send text messages directly to the rover's screen.
And the impact of this is just huge. He restores the brain trust.
Suddenly, he isn't alone anymore. He is now a remote terminal for thousands of scientists at JPL.
She doesn't have to figure out how to hack the rover for the long trip to Schiaparelli. They figure it out and just send him the code. He becomes part of the larger system again.
I love that image. He's a remote terminal. It completely changes the lone hero narrative. He is just the hands.
They are the brain.
He executes the code they write.
So let's map this system out explicitly. Who are the actors? If we look at this as like a network graph, who are the nodes?
Okay, let's break down the nodes in the network. First, you have Mark Watney.
The remote operator. The maintenance unit. He's the edge device.
Then JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab. They're the rapid prototyping hub. They're the ones frantically building models of the hab on Earth to test theories.
Busting out the duplicate rover to see if it flips over.
Exactly. Then you have NASA administration. Teddy and Venkat. They're the resource allocators and the narrative controllers. They manage the public and the money.
And you have the Hermes crew, the autonomous agents who eventually reject central control to execute the rescue.
And we can't forget the China National Space Administration, the CNSA.
Right, the external variable, the Iris probe exploded. NASA has no more boosters. They are out of options. They physically cannot get supplies to Mars.
But China has the Tiangshan.
A massive booster sitting on a pad, ready for a solar probe.
Which brings us to incentives. Why does China help? The book is very clear about this. It's not just altruism. It's not, we love America.
No, it's a transaction of scientific capital. The Chinese officials, Guoming and Zhu Tao, they discuss it explicitly in the text. If they give up their booster, they lose their solar probe. That's years of work down the drain.
But they negotiate.
They negotiate for a seat on the Ares 5 mission. They prioritize long-term access, putting a Chinese astronaut on Mars over the short-term secrecy of their booster technology.
It's a rational exchange within the system of international prestige and scientific access. It shows that even in a crisis, the system of incentives is still running.
It's always running. So let's talk about feedback loops. The whole book is driven by them.
The most critical one has to be the loop of failure.
Absolutely. The airlock blows out. This is a catastrophic failure. This freezes the potato crop. The potatoes die. This completely changes the caloric math.
Right, the starvation date moves way up.
Which forces a new plan. The Rich-Purnell maneuver becomes necessary because the original plan of waiting for a supply probe is no longer viable. The potatoes are dead.
So one failure creates a new constraint, which forces a new solution. It's not a straight line to success. It's this zigzag of just avoiding death.
And we have to mention the time delay. The 12-minute on average light speed delay means Earth cannot control Watney in real time.
Which is terrifying to think about.
It is. If he's driving off a cliff, by the time they see it, he's been dead for 12 minutes.
Localized authority.
Yes.
Yeah.
When that airlock blows, Watney has to fix it. He can't ask for permission. He can't wait for instructions. The system design forces autonomy at the edge. Central command simply cannot function with that kind of latency. It forces trust onto the operator.
So what are the present-day implications of all this? Why does a story about Mars matter to us down here? I mean, we aren't growing potatoes in our own waste.
Hopefully not. But look at the structural recurrence in disaster response. Compare Watney's situation to Apollo 13. Or even look at something like a pandemic response or a grid failure. The solution is never invent a magic wand.
No, it's always repurposing what you already have.
It is always the repurposing of existing systems.
Animalizing.
Literally. In the book, Watney has to strip the MAV, his only ride home, of everything. He takes out the seats, the control panels, the life support. He covers the nose cone with HAB canvas because the nose cone is too heavy. He turns a spaceship into a convertible.
He launches into space under a tarp. That is such a wild image. It sounds completely insane.
It sounds insane, but it's rational. Because that's what the physics allowed. Innovation in a crisis often looks like destruction. You're taking apart a functional system to build a survival system.
You burn the furniture to keep the house warm.
Exactly. The book teaches us to look at our resources not for what they are, but for what they can do.
Another implication is scientific collaboration versus geopolitics. We touched on China, but it's worth going a little deeper there.
I think so. The book suggests that scientific goals can create bridges that bypass political gridlock. The universal language of orbital dynamics forces cooperation.
Physics doesn't care about borders.
It doesn't. When the math says we need that Chinese booster to save the mission, the politics have to bend to the physics. It's a hopeful, but I think realistic view of how shared technical goals can override diplomatic frost.
And finally, there's the idea of visible failure.
The iris probe explosion. In a functional system that pushes boundaries, failure is a feature, not a bug. If you never fail, you aren't optimizing for the edge of possibility.
Sure.
But the lesson from Iris is that efficiency skipping checks to save time creates fragility.
It's the difference between being lean and being resilient. Iris was lean. It failed. The Hermes return trip was resilient because it had human redundancy.
And we live in a world that is obsessed with lean systems, just-in-time supply chains, minimal staffing. The Martian is a warning that lean breaks when the storm hits.
Right. Resilience requires slack in the system. It requires extra calories, extra fuel, extra brains.
Correct.
And this connects directly to our channel's theme, crisis in perception. One of the big things we always talk about is how narratives obscure labor.
Oh, absolutely. The public sees Mark Watney. They see Iron Man flying around in space, which he actually jokes about doing, poking a hole in his glove to fly.
Which, by the way, the scientists back home tell him is a terrible idea.
A terrible, terrible idea. They see the hero.
They see the hero.
They don't see the thousands of hours of overtime at JPL. They don't see the fabricators making the probe. They don't see Rich Purnell sleeping in his office to calculate the orbits. They don't see the guys who made the canvas for the HAB.
The great man theory blinds us to the efficacy of institutions. We want to believe in the singular hero because it's a simpler story. It fits on a movie poster.
But the reality is that Watney dies on Sol 6 without that institutional tether.
And without the radio. A lone genius without a radio is just a dead genius. His intelligence was magnified 1,000 times because he could downlink it to Earth.
Precisely. His intelligence was only useful because it could interface with the collective intelligence of Earth. He was a node, not an island.
There's also the theme of trust in process versus certainty.
Yes. The crew mutinies to execute the Rich Purnell maneuver.
Yeah.
Not because they were guaranteed success. Space travel has no guarantees.
No.
They do it because they verified the math. They trusted the physics.
In a world of information overload, the Martian teaches us that you don't need certainty to act. You need a verifiable process. You need to trust the math, even if the policy forbids it.
The crew didn't trust the administrator's policy. They trusted the astrodynamicist's numbers. That is a profound shift in authority.
So as we wrap up, what's the final reflection here? What do we take away from this word problem of a novel?
I think the book demystifies science. It treats science not as this magical authority that hands down truth from on high, but as a practice, as a grind.
Right.
Watney says, you solve one problem, then you solve the next, and if you solve enough problems, you get to come home. That is the essence of survival. It's iterative,
And it shows institutions as adaptive systems. NASA starts out so rigid. No, you can't tell the crew. No, we can't work with China. No, you can't strip the ship.
But the pressure of the crisis forces the system to adapt. It breaks its own rules to achieve the goal. It evolves in real time.
Resilience is collective. That is the takeaway. The final image of the book is Watney being caught by Beck on the tether during the intercept.
And that physical tether, it represents the systemic tether to humanity. He didn't save himself. We saved him. The system held.
So here's a provocative thought to leave you with. In our own crises, whether they're personal or societal, do we look for a hero to save us? Or do we look for the system leverage points that make survival possible? Are we waiting for Iron Man, or are we checking the math?
That is the question.
The book is The Martian by Andy Weir. It's absolutely worth checking out from your library if you haven't read it.
Or reading it again with this systems lens in mind. It completely changes the experience.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next. Thanks for listening.